Let's jump right in. Spontaneous human combustion. You've heard the term, right? Most of us just brush it off as this kind of spooky late-night campfire myth. But here's the thing almost no one ever stops to ask. Why did the highly rigid, deeply bureaucratic Victorian coroner system have a completely official inquest category for it? Today, in this explainer, we're stripping away all that folklore to look purely at the chilling physical record.
And we've got to start with this question right here, because we aren't talking about paranormal ghost stories. We are talking about a highly documented absolute friction between historical inquest files and modern thermodynamics. I mean, just picture the sheer dread of this. How does a human being suffer extreme, localized heat so intense it literally calcinates bone, but the fire is confined entirely to their own body, to the point where the wooden chair they're sitting on, the floors, the paper curtains just inches away, remain perfectly, completely unscorched?
To actually grasp the gravity of this mystery, we're going to follow the timeline. We'll start way back with Thomas Bartholin's medical account in 1673, move through the meticulous 1852 Aldgate inquest, fast forward to the comforting 1984 forensic consensus that supposedly solved it all, and finally, land right in the middle of a 2008 university physics lab that completely shattered that closure. Part 1. The Aldgate Anomaly. Okay, let's dive into the first really crucial piece of the puzzle. To even begin to understand this, we have to look at visceral, meticulously recorded crime scenes, specifically the 1852 inquest of John Belt of Aldgate. Looking at these declassified public record office files, you quickly realize we are not dealing with hearsay. We are reading sworn depositions transcripts taken by straight-laced legal professionals whose literal, day-to-day job was to accurately document dead bodies. And what they describe is, well, it's a physical impossibility. A body reduced to calcinated ash, while the wooden chair beneath him remained entirely unscorched. No accelerant was found, absolutely zero structural fire spread. I mean, fire spreads, right? It consumes fuel, it radiates heat outward. But in the case of John Belt, the fire somehow broke its own fundamental rules. Part 2. A Victorian medical dilemma. You can imagine how this eerie physical evidence presented a massive, unprecedented problem. Put yourself in the shoes of a Victorian coroner. These were men of rigid science and law, suddenly staring at a death that defied both. Looking at these Registrar General records, you can literally see the system desperately trying to classify an event it just couldn't comprehend. They desperately needed a procedural framework, a box to tick, but the physical reality of these localized infernos didn't fit into any known domestic accident or homicide. Surgeon Benjamin Richardson actually blew the whistle on this in an 1869 review for the British Medical Journal. He noticed something deeply unsettling. Across completely unconnected jurisdictions, we're talking Bavaria, Kentucky, Aldgate, these coroners were using near-identical language. They all kept describing extreme, localized heat that destroyed bone but was confined entirely to the victim, leaving the adjacent floors and curtains totally untouched. And Richardson hit the nail on the head. The system had absolutely no procedural framework to process this anomaly. None. Moving right along to Part 3, the Wick Effect Consensus.
Let's jump ahead to 1984. For over a century, this mystery just hung there, until modern forensic science decided to finally put the nail in the coffin. Forensic scientist John DeHaan published this landmark reanalysis, proposing a highly mechanical explanation known as the Wick effect. It was an elegant, albeit pretty gruesome model to explain how a human body could act as its own sustained fuel source.
So here are the mechanics of how it theoretically works. First, a small external spark like a dropped pipe ember lights the victim's clothing. That initial heat melts the subcutaneous human fat. That fat is then absorbed by the clothier, which basically acts like the wick of an inside-out candle. The result is a slow, intense, and highly localized burn that sustains itself without spreading to the rest of the room. Honestly, it was a brilliant mechanical explanation, and it quickly became the forensic consensus. Most pathologists accepted it because it made logical sense of the bizarre visual evidence. The forensic community breathed this massive sigh of relief, and the terrifying historical specter of spontaneous human combustion was officially stamped case closed. Science had won. Or so they thought. Part 4. Physics reopens the case. Because, science is never truly settled, is it? Just when everyone thought the archives were closed for good, a 2008 peer-reviewed study out of the University of Sheffield quietly completely dismantled that comfort. They compared the 1984 forensic consensus, which relied on that slow fat burn theory, against raw thermodynamics reality. The Sheffield researchers weren't looking at biology. They ran the hard numbers on heat transfer and bone calcination. And those numbers, they absolutely did not match the Wick effect narrative.
They found that to achieve the deep structural bone calcination documented in cases like John Belt's, you need an initial external ignition temperature exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. 1,000 degrees. Human bone does not just turn to ash easily. A slow, smoldering candlewick fire simply cannot achieve that level of instantaneous catastrophic destruction while leaving a wooden chair right underneath it totally untouched. So the Sheffield thermodynamics findings basically prove that the Wick effect is physically impossible for these specific historical cases. The calcination depth couldn't be replicated by a slow fat burn. The spatial confinement contradicts the massive energy output required. And crucially, that 1,000-degree initial ignition temperature completely exceeds any plausible domestic accident. A dropped match or pipe ember? No way. The physics said the official 1984 forensic explanation was impossible. Yet, those Victorian coroners had kept signing the certificate, staring at the ash.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Cases Without Ignition Point. So, if the Wick effect doesn't work, and the physics say it's impossible, what are we left with? Well, we are plunged right back into the eerie darkness of the Victorian archives. Check this out. The one detail nearly every popular account leaves out is that deep within the Public Record Office, there is a sealed 1869 Medical Examiner's Annex. It was forwarded to the General Register Office, it's sitting right there in their index, but the physical file is conspicuously absent from the bound public volume. It was completely segregated. And the official subject heading for this sealed, unresolvable file is simply and chillingly labeled Cases Without Ignition Point. I mean, wow. Even back then, the medical examiners realized they were dealing with something that possessed no external spark. They literally created a classified folder for human bodies that appeared to have just burned from within. And that right there brilliantly captures the enduring dread of this whole topic. If the 1984 forensic science was wrong, and the modern physics prove a domestic accident is impossible, what exactly is documented in that sealed 1869 Annex? What you should take away from this explainer isn't some neat, tied-up conclusion. It's the undeniable friction between the rigid laws of thermodynamics and the grim reality of the historical record, leaving us all with one deeply unsettling question. What unimaginable physical realities still remain locked away in that Victorian archive?